This podcast is sponsored by Ramp. Look, there's feelings and then there's the facts. If you're feeling like your finance team is bogged down in mundane manual tasks, the fact is you need Ramp. Ramp is the corporate card that makes the expense process fast and easy. The moment your team makes a purchase, Ramp handles everything. Receipt collection and approvals, the works. With Ramp, you can cut your month-end close from 5 days to 1, customize approval workflows, and get complete control over every transaction. Facts. Over 25,000 businesses trust Ramp, including Shopify and the Boys and Girls Club of America, which is why they were just named #1 in spend management by G2. Facts. Start using Ramp and you'll have more time to spend scaling your business. And that'll feel really good. Upgrade to Ramp for free today and get $250 at ramp.com. That's ramp.com. RAMP.com.
Cards issued by Sutton Bank, members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply.
You're listening to
DNA ID.
Brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime,
Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
all of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
On June 3, 1988, Paul Brinkley, a farmer with a large property outside Springfield in southeast Colorado, called the Baca County Sheriff's Office and reported that there were human bones in an overgrown field on his farm. Baca County Sheriff Willard Goff, some deputies, and the coroner, Robert Morrow, arrived at the farm and confirmed the find. Sun-bleached white bones from a person lay scattered in a field on the property. I have to clarify here that this was not a small, neatly groomed field. Think about the massive, untamed open spaces in the TV show Yellowstone and you're envisioning the right setting. The field was unused and covered with overgrown vegetation. The body, when it was a body, had not been buried but had decomposed above ground. There was no telling how long the bones had been there, but the coroner estimated 1 to 3 years. Baca County law enforcement worked with the farm operator to implement a thorough search of the surrounding area that lasted for several days. They crawled on hands and knees and sifted through the soil and processed a chunk of land measuring a half-mile long and 150 yards wide. Photos of the scene show stakes in the ground with crime scene tapes strung around them and little red flags in the ground where bones and pieces of evidence were discovered. Farmer Brinkley had no idea how the body, now just bones, had gotten there. And certainly no one knew who the person the bones belonged to was. The only clues to the Doe's identity were the tattered remains of clothing found with the body. These were gray Levi's cords lying 80 feet from the body. They were size 30 by 31, but the unidentified person was not tall, and the pant legs had been hemmed to 27.5 inches, and half of one pant leg was missing altogether. Also found was a beige winter coat with white faux fur collar and matching 4-inch faux fur cuffs. This was lying in the field 163 feet from the bones, in a different direction than the pants. A bra size 34B was found 25 feet north of the coat, but any shirt, underwear, shoes, or socks were long gone, or had never been there in the first place. Still, the bra pointed to the body being a Jane, not a John Doe. She had one 1986 quarter in her pants pocket, but nothing else was recovered. Based on the jacket and bra, as I've said, inferences were made that the Doe was a woman, but as we've heard in previous cases like Chester Briney and Chimney Doe, circumstantial evidence can be misleading. So Baca County Sheriff Willard Goff arranged for the bones to be transferred to Dr. Hoffman, an anthropologist in Colorado Springs. He was charged with determining the race and sex of the doe, as well as any distinguishing physical characteristics. Dr. Hoffman noted that while part of the spinal cord was still connected, the skeleton was not complete. Arms, hands, and shoulder blades were missing. Feet and lower legs were missing. But he had enough to work with to conclude that the doe was a woman between the ages of 19 to 24, of Hispanic or Native American ancestry. She was 5'2" to 5'4" tall, about 120 to 130 pounds, with brown hair. From her pelvic bones, Dr. Hoffman concluded that the Jane Doe had never given birth, which would prove to be erroneous. The woman had had significant dental work, the details of which led the investigators to believe she came from Mexico or near the Mexican border. She had 2 silver crowns, one upper and one lower, both on the left. I know you're all wondering what the cause of death was of this young woman. I hate to tell you, it was undetermined. But young women don't generally just lie down and die in remote fields with no shoes on and no ID. Foul play was immediately suspected, and the investigation began as a homicide. It was also noted that the 2 shin bones of the woman had been broken at about the same level, approximately mid-shin. These breaks did not appear to be post-mortem, but to have occurred while the victim was alive. Let's talk a little about the setting. The farm where Jane Doe's remains were found is located 20 miles southwest of the town of Springfield, a tiny, sparsely populated farming and ranching community located in the far southeast corner of the state. Early reporting says that investigators noted that Jane Doe was found 100 yards off a county road that was a common route used by interstate truckers. Of course, police did all the usual things to try to identify Jane Doe. They sent out bulletins to other agencies with her scant description and a description of her clothing. A press release was published asking for anyone with information to contact the Baca County Sheriff's Office. They checked all missing persons reports that came across their desks. They canvassed the area, asking if anyone had seen anything of note that could have been someone dumping the body. They took dental impressions, analyzed Jane Doe's dental work, and submitted her dental records to the National Crime Information Center to try to obtain a match with any missing persons. As the years wore on and DNA became the standard for human identification, her bones were analyzed in attempts to extract DNA. Facial reconstructions were done to try to capture a lifelike image of Jane Doe's face based on her skull structure. After 17 years of fruitless efforts to identify Jane Doe, the decision was made finally to bury her remains. On September 2, 2005, Jane Doe was interred in Springfield Cemetery in a stone crypt with an engraved plaque reading, Jane Doe, found 1988, buried 2005. Someone's daughter, gone but not forgotten. This was all paid for by community members troubled about Jane Doe's fate. In something I've never seen done before, papers containing the case information were buried with the body, in case Jane Doe was identified sometime way down the road, so there would be some context. In 2006, Jane Doe was entered into the Doe Network as 116UFCO. An artistic rendering of her face was also released to try to generate tips. After that, there was no activity on her case for 15 years. In May of 2021, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, or CBI, reached out to the Baca County authorities and proposed submitting Jane Doe into NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. NamUs had not existed when Jane Doe was found. It was launched in 2007. I'd like to pause here and state that it is crucial that any agencies with John and Jane Does or missing persons make use of NamUs. NamUs is the only national repository for missing, unidentified, and unclaimed persons cases, and its algorithms are set up to match characteristics of unidentified human remains with missing persons, but it only works with the data that is entered into it by law enforcement. However, NamUs is available for public viewing. The database makes it very easy to learn details surrounding unidentified persons in the system. Web sleuthers, families searching for loved ones, and investigators can all freely access the database and compare notes on cases of missing people and nameless bodies that have been found. Users can even search for certain criteria. NamUs lists rule-outs, which are missing persons whose stats and characteristics have been compared to a NamUs Doe and officially ruled out. It's a free and easy-to-use database funded by the National Institute of Justice, part of the U.S. Department of Justice. Let's hope funding for this crucial resource continues. Anyway, anyone who is seeking a missing loved one or who knows of a Doe should be using it. Back to Baca Jane Doe. She was finally added to NamUs in May of 2021 as UP80455. 2 months later, in July of 2021, the Baca County Coroner's Office decided to take things a step further. They contracted with Solved by DNA, a Colorado-based investigative genetic genealogy company, to attempt to identify Jane Doe. But 16 years had passed since Jane Doe was buried, and samples sufficient to obtain the SNP profile required to employ IgG had not been retained. They were going to have to exhume her. The exhumation took place on December 13, 2021. Jane Doe's teeth and a femur were collected, and the rest of the remains reburied. The samples were delivered to the CBI, who extracted an STR DNA profile for upload to the CODIS Unidentified Human Remains database. I have to explain here. Family members seeking missing loved ones are requested to provide DNA samples for upload to the National DNA Index system. These samples, known as family reference samples, are voluntary DNA submissions that are entered into the Relatives of Missing Persons Index. They are then searched only against DNA profiles in the Unidentified Human Remains database, the repository of DNA samples of John and Jane Does, to see if there are any matches. Note that these are different from direct profiles of a missing person, which are derived from items such as toothbrushes, hairs, or tissue samples. These are uploaded to the Missing Persons Index of CODIS for searching against profiles derived from human remains. Having those DNA samples is ideal, but of course, DNA from missing persons is not always available. Often, the family reference samples, unidentified human remains samples, and missing persons samples are uploaded to CODIS in connection with NamUs. Per NamUs, first-degree relatives such as parent, full sibling, or child are most beneficial for STR DNA comparisons. Of course, even close relatives such as parents and children share only about 50% of their DNA. This is why CODIS emphasizes that it is strongly recommended that more than one family reference sample be submitted for missing persons. The more close relatives enter their DNA, the more filled out the DNA profile will be of the missing person, and therefore, the greater the chances that a match will be made based on similarities in STRs. So now it was time for genealogy. Jane Doe's femur and teeth were sent to Gene by Gene for whole genome sequencing of the bones. A SNP profile was obtained, and in May of 2022, it was provided to Solved by DNA's Michelle Kennedy. You'll recall, Ms. Kennedy is the Colorado-based genealogist who also has a master's degree in forensic criminology and is a certified crime analyst for a major metropolitan sheriff's office in Colorado. I discussed her work on the Terry Becker and Sherry Bridgewater case, which ran last week. Here, Ms. Kennedy uploaded Jane Doe's SNP profile to both Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch. From Family Tree DNA, they learned that Jane Doe was predominantly Hispanic with origins in Central and South Mexico, Spain, and Northern Africa. And there was a promising match right off the bat. The top match in Family Tree DNA shared 490 centimorgans of DNA with Jane Doe. That was great. This match, whom we are calling Joe, was likely a first cousin once removed to Jane Doe, likely Jane Doe's first cousin's child. Further, Ms. Kennedy knew that Joe was related to Jane Doe on his father's side, since she could see that one of his mother's cousins, who was in GEDmatch, shared no DNA with Jane Doe. And he was a junior, so it was very easy to see who his father was, Joe Sr. But when Ms. Kennedy built out his family tree, none of his paper paternal relatives matched to Jane Doe at all. The genealogist learned that Joe was adopted. Despite being named a junior, Sr. was his stepfather. Joe did not know who his biological father was. That was unfortunate because the father was the relative the genealogist needed to complete the puzzle. The second top match shared only 122 centimorgans of DNA with Jane Doe and had an extremely common name and appeared to live in Canada based on his email address. So back to the top match, Joe, the adopted possible first cousin once removed to Jane Doe. The genealogist was able to determine genetic networks to which Joe's unknown father was related, the unknown man's mother's network and his father's network. She didn't know which one Jane Doe belonged to, but there were a finite number of people within these networks. Jane Doe was either a descendant of the union of Jose Galvez and Ramona Morales or Domingo Rojas and Maria Mendez. The Baca County Sheriff's Office sent letters to living descendants from these unions, requesting information on any female family members who had gone missing after 1986. Remember, the date of the coin in Jane Doe's pocket. The letters asked family members to get in touch with solved by DNA. And this was how Michelle Kennedy first learned of the name Nora Castillo. A woman descended from the union of Domingo Rojas and Maria Mendez informed Ms. Kennedy that her cousin's child, Jane Doe would turn out to be this woman's first cousin once removed, had gone missing. The missing woman's name was Nora Castillo, and she had a living sister and 2 living children. But there was a problem. Nora Castillo, the missing woman, was already in CODIS. DNA from her daughter Crystal had been submitted years earlier. A standard CODIS search of Jane Doe's STR DNA profile after the exhumation had of course been done, and there was no hit to Nora Castillo's daughter's DNA sample. Nonetheless, Michelle Kennedy could not ignore the other signs that Baca County Jane Doe was Nora. She was the right age. She'd gone missing in the right time frame. So she provided Nora's name to the Baca County investigators. They arranged for a direct one-to-one STR DNA search in CODIS, comparing Nora Castillo's daughter Crystal's DNA, which was in there, and that of Baca County Jane Doe, which was also in there. A hit confirmed a likely parent-child relationship between Crystal and Jane Doe. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation lab report, dated October 6, 2022, confirmed that Crystal Castillo was Jane Doe's daughter. Based on the CBI comparison, Jane Doe was positively identified as Nora Elia Castillo, born Castro, a great-granddaughter of Domingo Rojas and Maria Mendez. It's worth noting that later, a DNA sample obtained from Nora's half-sister Soya and entered into Family Tree DNA showed they shared 1,695 centimorgans of DNA consistent with a half-sister relationship. Baca County Jane Doe was Nora Elia Castillo.
Every day, predators are targeting children and teens online. The Department of Homeland Security's Know to Protect campaign provides resources to combat online child exploitation and abuse. Learn how you can help protect our kids online and join the fight. Visit knowtoprotect.gov so together we can stop online child exploitation. That's KNOW, 2, protect.gov.
Unlike in many cases we hear about on this show, it turned out that there was a missing persons report filed for Nora Castillo, which was how her daughter's DNA ended up in CODIS's Family Reference Sample Database. A missing persons report from the McAllen, Texas Police Department provided descriptors of Nora Castillo that were consistent with what Baca County investigators knew about their Jane Doe. She was diminutive, she had dark hair, she was of Hispanic origin. The only thing that was inconsistent was the original coroner had stated that Baca County Jane Doe had never delivered children. Nora had, as you heard, the DNA of one of her daughters was used to identify her. Nora's daughter Crystal was contacted and notified that her mother had been found in Colorado decades earlier. She called her sister Josie, who called the Baca County authorities herself because she couldn't quite believe it. But it was true. Their mother, Nora, had been found. So who was Nora? She was born in Reynosa, Tamaulipas, Mexico on May 8, 1965, as Nora Elia Rojas Castro. She was one of 7 children raised by a single mom named Maria, who relocated her family right across the U.S. border to McAllen, Texas, where Nora became a naturalized citizen of the U.S. Nora rebelled as a teen and at 15 got pregnant and married the baby's father. Her daughter Josie was born, and Nora went on to have another daughter, Crystal. But Nora's marriage fell apart, and she went through a string of unstable and abusive relationships with older men. She was just about 20 years old at this time. Nora got work at local clubs and bars and eventually got involved with drugs. Nora's sisters, including her sister Soya, 3 years younger but her best friend, recall her loud laugh, her fun-loving nature, her sense of adventure, and her commitment to family. Nora's daughter Josie has said that her mom was always smiling and was very friendly and outgoing. But in 1985 or 1986, Nora lost custody of her 2 young daughters, and Child Protective Services sent them to live with their father Jesus and his new family in New Mexico. Nora was devastated. In late 1986, she told her family in McAllen, Texas, that she was going to get her girls and would return by Thanksgiving. That did not happen. What did happen was that Nora broke into the New Mexico home of her ex-husband where her girls were living. Apparently, she tried to abduct them. which Josie told me that she remembers. The police were called and Nora was arrested. She was sent to jail in either Hobbs or Carlsbad, New Mexico, and then was sent to a mental health facility. She wrote letters or notes to her family from the mental health facility in December 1986. No one knows exactly what happened after that. According to what Soya learned after contacting the mental health facility, Nora was deemed improved and was released. And then she was gone. Her family was aware that she had mental health issues, a history of drug usage, and that since she didn't have a car, she often hitchhiked, accepting rides from truckers. They don't recall when this happened, but at some point after leaving the mental health facility, Nora made a phone call to one of her sisters. In the call, she was crying and upset and said she was in Colorado. Nora had no known contacts in that state and no reason to be there. After that, she was never heard from again, and her remains turned up in Paul Brinkley's field in southwest Colorado in 1988. Nora's daughters were told that their mom was crazy and on drugs. They felt that she had abandoned them since they never heard from her. But as Crystal and Josie grew older, they wondered constantly about their mother. They wanted to know where she was and why she wasn't a part of their lives. Meanwhile, between 1988 and 1990, Nora's mother, Maria, took buses back and forth between McAllen and New Mexico to look for her daughter. The police there did not know where she was and told her that Nora was an adult and there was nothing she could do. Maria even paid a man claiming to be a private investigator to search for her daughter, but he ghosted her after taking her money. When Maria died in 1996, Nora's sister Soya continued the search. She perused New Mexico obituaries looking for any sign that her sister was deceased, never finding any. She also started a Facebook page called Nora Castillo Rojas. Soya was devastated to learn that the police in New Mexico had never filed a missing persons report for her sister, even though the family had been inquiring about her whereabouts in that state for 10 years. So she filed one with McAllen PD. It's unclear what that agency did to investigate Nora's disappearance. But in 2004, they did contact the family when unidentified female human remains were located in McAllen. McAllen police obtained a DNA sample from Nora's daughter Crystal to test against the DNA of the Jane Doe. It did not match, but the DNA sample from Crystal was entered into CODIS, where it sat until Jane Doe's DNA was finally uploaded in 2021. But even then, remember, it didn't hit. As I said earlier, even close relatives, such as parents and children, share only about 50% of their DNA. This is why it's recommended that multiple close relatives of missing persons submit DNA in support of the search functions. DNA samples from multiple close family members can build a more complete DNA-based pedigree tree for the missing person. This is from the FBI's website. Quote, "Creation of a pedigree tree for the missing person's related DNA record is strongly encouraged. A pedigree tree is a graphical representation of the relationship of the missing person with two or more relatives. The more robust pedigree trees have at least one relative that is a biological mother, biological father, or biological child of the missing person." End quote. If additional relatives of Nora's, Josie, and Soya had been told to upload their DNA to CODIS, the profiles likely would have hit. We heard that in 2004, Crystal gave DNA to help find her mother. Also, as a young woman, Josie was in contact with the McAllen, Texas detectives and said she could tell there wasn't much going on with the case at the time, and it remained that way for the next 20 years. Finally, when they learned that their mother had been lying in a grave in Springfield, Colorado for 20-plus years, Josie and Crystal traveled to their mom's gravesite, laying flowers and taking photos. They also traveled with investigators to the farm where Nora was found to observe their mom's original resting place for themselves. The same farmer, Paul Brinkley, still owned the land and cleared a pathway to the resting site so Josie and Crystal could navigate the field. The family now hopes to replace the Jane Doe headstone with one with Nora's name and personal information on it. When I asked Josie if she planned to move her mom's gravesite, she said no. There's a wondrous aspect to the symmetry of where Nora Castillo ended up being found. Her daughter Crystal lives in Hobbs, New Mexico. Her other daughter Josie lives in Longmont, Colorado. Nora has been in Springfield, Colorado since 1986, almost exactly halfway between her two daughters on a map. Driving between the two cities takes you right through Springfield. It's still unknown why Nora was in Colorado or the circumstances of her death. She was released from a mental health facility and very likely had no money and no means of supporting herself. She was known to hitchhike and possibly took a ride with the wrong person. It seems the likely scenario is that someone killed her, possibly after torturing her if the broken leg bones are any indication, and then deposited her in the field, likely a random spot passed on the way to a final destination. Another possibility is that perhaps she was walking and was hit by a vehicle, breaking her legs and killing her, and a panicked driver dragged her into the field and drove off. But this doesn't account for her missing shoes, socks, shirt, and underwear, and her lack of any personal items whatsoever. So Nora's homicide is unsolved, but the case is being investigated. Her case has been entered by CBI into the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program and Highway Serial Killer Initiative databases, due to the possibility that she was picked up by a truck driver. Baca County authorities are hoping that anyone who has any information about Nora's case will call the Baca County Sheriff's Office at 719-523-4511 or the McAllen, Texas Police Department at 956-681-2221. Recently, I let listeners know about a new benefit available to them called an AbJack Insider subscription that's available through Apple Podcasts. An AbJack Insider subscription will give listeners ad-free access to every bit of DNA ID content published, both past episodes and future episodes. It will also give you benefits like early access and bonus content. Head over to Apple Podcasts and click on the DNA ID show page or the AbJack Entertainment channel to start a free trial. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to DNAIDpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.